Hey guys! For today's video I finally decided to make a small tutorial on Inkwashes. A lot of people were asking me about it a couple of years ago when I was doing ink commissions, but I didn't know how to edit videos back then, and overall explaining things isn't really my strong point, so I was postponing it for a long time. Anyway, better late than never, so I'm gonna try doing it now. So I'm going to cover the basics really quickly and then make a small drawing using the methods that I mentioned, and I hope it will give you an idea about how to approach inkwashes. When I was in university, I used a wooden board like this one as a base. It doesn't have any paper on it right now, but when I used it, I would take a piece of watercolor paper, soak it in water, and then attach it to the board with buttons like this. And when the paper dries up, you get an absolutely flat paperboard, which doesn't buckle when you draw with watercolors or inks. Now I use these paper blocks where the paper is glued together on the sides. It's approximately the same as using a board, but you don't have to prepare anything. Everything is already done for you. I'm not sure if there is a name for it in English. I'm not really familiar with English art slang. Here we call it sklejka. So again, I prefer glued paper blocks. Paper blocks. I prefer glued paper blocks. Because the paper isn't buckling at all, and when you finish your drawing and let it dry up, you get a perfect flat painting. But for the drawing that I'm gonna do later in this video, I used Arches paper block. That is just like an album where you can turn pages, and to be honest, I hate Arches. I know people love Arches paper and consider it high quality, but it's buckling a lot because it's not glued on the sides, and also it's bad for layering when you paint several ink layers on top of each other. Oh, and one more thing that a lot of people are using, and I don't really dig this method because it doesn't work for me. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one. So let's say this palette is our paper for drawing, and what I see is that people would tape it down to the board around the perimeter, but it doesn't really prevent paper from buckling. So I'm not sure how does it help. Alright, let's start our basics demo. So first of all, you will need to tilt your drawing surface. You can put something between the desk and the paper block, or tilt your table if you have one of those tables with regulated angle. Then I have some water here. It's just normal water for washing your brushes. For the brushes, you need a soft brush that absorbs a lot of water. The best ones are those made of hair, but you can get a synthetic brush for a cheaper price. But I would say that the best ones are sable and squirrel brushes, also goat brushes. They have a longer lifespan. Also, you won't have to fill your brush with ink every few seconds. For the ink washes, I always use rotring ink. It's this one. It's waterproof, and once you make a layer with this ink, it won't be affected by or smudged with water. It will stay on paper unaffected, so it's really good for making a lot of layers. Also, you need something to pour the ink into. I use this cute little bun thing, but before I used just an old jar lid. Then I have a bunch of containers. You need at least 3 of them. It's for making 3 different tones of ink by mixing it with water. I'm pouring some ink in one container. Then I'm gonna add some water in it. It will be our darkest ink tone. Then I'm going to pour some of this mix into other containers and add more water there, so they will contain lighter tones than the first one. And here I prepared the tones for our ink wash. Right now is the time to check the tones, and if some of them are too dark or too light, we can fix this by adding more water or more ink. So this one is supposed to be the most light tone. Then we have a darker one. And the most dark one. Right now I think that I need to make the middle one a little bit darker, so I'm gonna dip the brush into pure ink and mix it in our middle potion. Now you can see that it became way darker, and now I think it's closer to the middle between the light tone and the dark tone. Now let's make the last preparations, and I'm gonna show you how to do gradients or fill in the big areas with just one tone. And we're finally ready to ink. I'm gonna fill in the first rectangle with just one tone. Let's do it with middle tone. Take a good amount of ink on your brush. You don't want to dip it into the ink every 2 seconds. Also here I keep this tape under my paper block to keep it tilted. It's really important because you need the water to flow down and keep the edge of your strokes wet. I've started applying the ink mix from the top with diagonal strokes, and I keep the edge of this area watery by dragging the water down. If you let the edge dry up, you'll have a visible line there, and if you want a solid and smoothly covered area, you absolutely want to prevent that. Now we have some water at the bottom, and to get rid of it, you just need to wipe off your brush and then pick the extra water with it. Now we're gonna do a gradient from light to dark, but before I use the lightest ink tone, I'm gonna dip the brush into water, so we'll have the gradient from no tone to the dark tone. Just like with the ink, I'm dragging the water down, keeping the edge wet. It's important for keeping a gradient smooth. Then I'm using the lightest ink tone and adding it to the watery edge. When I feel like it's time to darken our gradient, I pick the next tone. And as you can guess, then I'm switching to the darkest tone. I'm not actually super satisfied with how it came out, because I feel like the dark tone was a little bit too dark, so the difference between the middle tone and the dark tone is pretty visible, and the gradient is not as smooth as I would like it. But overall it works. So now we're going to make a gradient from dark to light. Usually when I'm inking, I'm just rotating the paper, so I always ink gradients from light to dark, because this way it's easier for me to control the ink. But we're gonna do it from dark to light to see how it works. And now we're doing the very same thing as before, but first picking a dark tone, then middle tone, then light tone. Make sure to clean the brush well before dipping it into the lighter tone, because otherwise you can change it by mixing in some extra ink. And the last thing we're gonna do is making different tones by layering. It's gonna be kinda like a gradient, but with visible borders. It's for when you need to darken your layer evenly. First I'm gonna cover it with one tone, and then we're gonna leave it for a while to dry up. And one thing that I want to say is don't rush when you do ink washes. I think it's one of the most commonly made mistakes when people are impatient and add another layer when the first one isn't completely dry, and it makes the ink blur into the first layer. So unless it is your intention to make the lines blurry, you want to give it enough time to get dry, or use a hair dryer as an option. So now it is dry, and I'm gonna darken the tone in these small rectangles. Okay, I'm too lazy to cover the last rectangle, so I'm just gonna cover one of the gradients that we did before, just to show you that because this ink is waterproof, when you apply another layer, the first one gets absolutely unaffected. It's absolutely great for drawing because it lets you start with light tones, and if you don't rush, it's very easy to control your values. You can always make something darker, also step by step, so you always can stop when you feel like this area is already dark enough, but you also can come back to it anytime if you feel that in relation to other parts, it became too light. As you can see, I made both of our gradients darker without changing how the tones are in relation to each other. Oh, and remember how I told you that you gotta wait for the first layer to dry out before applying the next one? I'm gonna show you a pretty cool effect that you can get if you don't wait for the first layer to dry up. I'm gonna apply some water to the paper and then drop some ink in it. Also, let me show you one more little trick for adding tiny ink drops on your drawing. I'm taking a small brush, dipping it in the ink, and then tapping on something lightly. It's just for creating some texture and some visual interest. And you can use white ink as well as black. And finally, knowing all that stuff, we can make an actual drawing. I hope it's okay if I don't speak much during the second part. I always start with making shadows to show the form. It's better to start with really light tones and then go darker and darker, because you can always add some tone if it's too light, but it's hard to fix something when you make it too dark from the start, so it's better to be patient. Because I used Arches paper, which I'm not used to and which isn't good for inks, some ink blurred into the light area over here, so I'm gonna fix it with the white pencils and white ink. Now it already looks much better. And here's my voice again. I'm gonna switch to a charcoal pencil now. I love mixing watercolors and inks with pencils. It adds a nice texture and soft black lines, and you can easily add the details with pencils. And here this drawing is almost done. I'm just fixing some tones with the black and white pencils. I could do it with ink, but at this point it was getting really late and I became very impatient and just wanted to wrap it up quickly. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I explained you the overall ink wash technique. You just need a lot of patience and some pencils to cover up your fails. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new from it. Have a great week and goodbye!